The world believed it already knew Tina Turner's story. Yet, in the days following her passing, as millions mourned and tributes flooded every corner of the globe, something quietly surfaced behind the closed doors of her private estate. Something that her closest family members could barely speak about without trembling. Something that made even the most loyal fans, people who had followed her for half a century, break down in tears. But what was it? That question has traveled from living rooms to studios, from magazine covers to online platforms, stirring confusion and painful curiosity. Because while Tina Turner's life was often an open book, her final intentions were not. No official statement disclosed the full truth. No press release hinted at the emotional weight of what was found. Even now, the silence feels deliberate, almost protective, like Tina herself had planned one last moment that would freeze the world in place. A final gesture. A final revelation. A final fortune that carries far more emotional gravity than financial value. And yet, no answer comes at the beginning. Instead, we must travel backward, into the life she built from ashes and fire, into the soul of the woman who transformed herself again and again until she became someone the world thought could never fall, never bend, never break. It is only by revisiting her journey that the magnitude of what she left behind becomes fully understood. And in the end, it is about the one thing her fans and family never expected her to leave behind. Before she was Tina Turner, the global icon, the queen of rock electrified by raw fire, she was Anna Mae Bullock from Nutbush, Tennessee. A rural landscape of dirt roads, cotton fields, and long humid summers shaped the earliest years of a girl who had no clue she would one day redefine music itself. Nutbush in the 1940s and 1950s was a small, segregated southern town where opportunities for young black girls were scarce. Her parents worked long, unforgiving hours, and the instability at home due to domestic conflict meant that Anna Mae spent long periods with relatives who tried to raise her with discipline and love. Yet, even in this turbulence, something unforgettable began to shine: her voice. She sang in church. She sang in fields. She sang in moments when life became too heavy for a child to carry. People noticed. They always did. Her voice wasn't simply loud, it carried emotion that felt ancient, almost prophetic. It felt like her refuge, her shield, her one true direction. By her teenage years, Anna Mae had absorbed the rhythms of gospel choirs, the blues of the Mississippi Delta, and the early sounds of rock and roll. She didn't yet know where life was taking her, but something inside her whispered that Nutbush was only the beginning. The real transformation began when she stepped into the nightclubs of St. Louis, where local musicians performed with urgency and heat. It was here that fate introduced her to the man who would change her life, and her name, forever. In the smoky, charged atmosphere of St. Louis's club scene, young Anna Mae encountered Ike Turner, already a respected bandleader, musician, and producer. Ike was immediately struck by her energy, the force in her voice, the way she commanded attention even without trying. Soon, she began performing with his group, the Kings of Rhythm, and the collaboration was instant lightning. But this was not merely a career pairing. It was the beginning of a brand, a movement, a persona crafted to maximize impact. Ike reshaped her identity, her style, her sound, her stage presence. And with one decision, he gave her a name that would one day echo across continents: Tina Turner. They formed the Ike and Tina Turner Revue, one of the most electrifying live acts of the era. Their shows were volcanic, high-speed choreography, explosive vocals, rhythmic precision, a sound that blended rock, soul, blues, and gospel. They toured relentlessly, sometimes performing hundreds of shows in a single year. Behind the curtain, however, the story was far more complicated. Business dynamics were heavily controlled. Financial arrangements often favored Ike. Tina worked tirelessly, sometimes under extreme pressure, to maintain the empire they were building. The world saw glamour, confidence, and power, but the woman behind the persona was carrying burdens the public never understood at the time. Still, the persona grew. The brand exploded. The world began to recognize Tina Turner as a singular force, one of the few performers who could push a stage into chaos with sheer presence. The transformation was complete. But the cost was growing. By the 1970s, beneath the dazzling success of the Revue, Tina Turner was living in a quiet, suffocating crisis. The public knew her as a fierce performer, indestructible, glamorous, unstoppable. Yet the truth was a private battle marked by emotional suffering, exhaustion, and unrelenting control. Night after night, she poured every ounce of her soul onto the stage. Day after day, she fought to maintain her sanity behind closed doors. Her life had become a contradiction, adored by millions, yet isolated in ways no one could see. When Tina Turner walked out of her marriage and professional partnership, she left behind more than an empire. She left behind the life she had known since she was a teenager. She entered the late 1970s with a legally protected name, but with almost nothing else. Her finances were shattered. Her credit was damaged. Her reputation, though respected, was seen by the industry as past its commercial prime. And the world that once cheered for her suddenly seemed unsure of her next chapter. She began rebuilding from the absolute bottom. These were the survival years. Small venues replaced world tours. Las Vegas lounges replaced sold-out arenas. Guest appearances on television shows became her new income stream. But each performance, whether in a smoky casino showroom or a late-night TV cameo, carried an unmistakable spark. Tina performed as though she had something to prove to herself, not the industry. She reinvented her sound, experimented with rock influences, and began reshaping her stage identity into something fierce, polished, and newly liberated. Financially, she was climbing out of a crater. Managers turned her down. Labels looked the other way. Radio executives believed her time had passed. But beneath the professional rejection was a quiet undercurrent of admiration from people who recognized something extraordinary, a fire that refused to go out. A few key figures stepped in. Promoters who remembered the intensity of her earlier performances. Record executives who saw her as an untapped powerhouse rather than a fading star. Friends and mentors who stood by her even when the commercial world would not. Slowly, the rebuilding transitioned into momentum. Momentum became opportunity. Opportunity became transformation. By the early 1980s, Tina was no longer simply surviving. She was positioning herself for what would become one of the greatest comebacks in music history. And the world had no idea what was coming. The music industry has always been quick to dismiss artists, especially women, after a certain age. For Tina Turner, that barrier did not merely exist, it towered over her. She was in her 40s, financially recovering, and considered too old by executives who often overlooked women the moment they aged out of their 20s. And then Private Dancer happened. Released in 1984, the album was not just a comeback, it was a seismic shift. The world was reintroduced to Tina Turner, not as the energetic vocalist from a duo, but as a fully realized rock legend in her own right. Her voice, matured and sharpened by decades of pain and resilience, exploded through tracks like What's Love Got to Do With It, Better Be Good to Me, and Private Dancer. The album became a global sensation. Grammy Awards followed. #1 hits dominated charts across continents. For the first time in her life, Tina Turner was not just popular, she was unprecedentedly powerful. She became an international symbol of reinvention. A woman in her 40s outperforming artists half her age. A survivor who turned her story into a blueprint for personal freedom. A performer whose stage presence became the benchmark for generations of female artists. Financially, Private Dancer was transformative. Royalties surged. Touring revenue soared. Endorsements poured in. She entered a new era, one where her wealth began to grow not from joint ventures or shared contracts, but from her own independent brand. She had complete control, creative, financial, and personal. In the years that followed, Tina Turner became a global icon, not because she came back, but because her comeback was greater than anyone had ever imagined. By the mid-1980s, Tina Turner had become a cultural phenomenon, one who transcended music. Her talent, charisma, and raw intensity caught the attention of Hollywood, leading to one of the most iconic film roles of the era, Auntie Entity in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. But film was only one lane. Her true empire was built on touring. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, Tina Turner dominated stadiums worldwide. Her concerts were not mere performances. They were events, massive, electrifying spectacles that blended choreography, storytelling, athletic stamina, and vocal mastery. Fans traveled across continents just to see her. Her Break Every Rule tour and 24/7 tour set attendance records. Her stage became a battlefield where she outperformed artists half her age. Her brand became unstoppable. Behind the scenes, she negotiated exceptionally smart deals. Performance contracts that maximized her earnings. Rights agreements that protected her image. Licensing arrangements that allowed her brand to grow even during years when she performed less frequently. She was no longer just a singer, she was a corporation, a business empire, a blueprint for modern artist management. And as she expanded her horizons, she was quietly building something else. Something emotional, something personal, something that would shock the world after her passing. Her legacy was no longer just a career. It was becoming a message. A message her fans and family would only understand once everything she left behind came to light. The public saw Tina Turner as unstoppable, an ageless force, a performer whose energy defied time. But behind the spotlight, she quietly carried battles that few understood. Her health challenges began to accumulate over the decades. Chronic hypertension, which she had endured since the 1970s, silently damaged her organs and led to long-term complications. In 2013, only weeks after her marriage, Tina suffered a stroke that impaired her ability to walk. She had to relearn basic mobility, a process that tested her patience and determination. Yet, she approached recovery with the same discipline she applied to every challenge in her life. In 2016, she was diagnosed with intestinal cancer, a devastating blow for someone who had just begun enjoying the peace she had earned. Treatment was aggressive, exhausting, and emotionally draining. The complications didn't stop there. Her long-time battle with high blood pressure led to kidney failure, forcing her to confront the possibility that she would not survive without a transplant. Owen Bach made a decision that left her overwhelmed with gratitude. He offered her one of his kidneys. His donation saved her life in 2017, deepening their bond beyond anything words could describe. Through each health crisis, Tina Turner remained private. She avoided sensational media coverage. She refused to be defined by illness. She continued living with dignity, choosing discretion over publicity. Her Buddhist practice became even more essential. She meditated through pain. She chanted for strength. She embraced a mindset of acceptance rather than resentment. These years were fragile, yet they were also filled with profound reflection. Tina understood that her life had been built on resilience, and now the resilience was internal, quieter, softer, but equally powerful. Despite suffering, she maintained grace. She stayed present. She protected her peace. She protected her family. And she prepared, patiently, intentionally, for what she would eventually leave behind. Switzerland became Tina Turner's refuge, a world far removed from the noise and chaos of global fame. Her lakeside estate in Küsnacht, overlooking the serene waters of Lake Zurich, represented more than luxury. It represented freedom. Here, Tina Turner lived not as a superstar, but as a woman reclaiming her life. Her home was filled with natural light, minimalist design, and a warmth that came from intention rather than extravagance. She surrounded herself with objects that carried personal meaning, spiritual symbols, art from cultures she respected, handwritten lyrics, framed photographs, and items collected throughout her global travels. Her days were peaceful. She woke early, often beginning with meditation and chanting. She walked through her garden, tending to flowers with the same care she brought to her music. She cooked, read, listened to classical music, and reflected quietly by the lake. Locals adored her, not because she was famous, but because she was humble and kind. She shopped in nearby boutiques, greeted neighbors, and occasionally visited small restaurants with Owen. To the community, she was simply Tina, a warm, elegant woman who valued privacy and treated everyone with respect. Professionally, she remained active behind the scenes. She maintained control over her brand and image. She negotiated licensing agreements. She approved stage productions, book projects, museum exhibitions, and biographical films. Her signature remained the final authority in all decisions involving her legacy. She also focused on writing and reflection. Her memoirs, interviews, and personal notes reveal a woman deeply aware of her journey, of its beauty, its brutality, and the meaning she carved from it. In Switzerland, she learned the art of stillness. She embraced a life with fewer demands and more introspection. She cultivated gratitude for the peace she had long deserved. But even in this serenity, she was building something else. Something no one saw coming. Something that would one day leave her fans and family in tears. Her time in Switzerland was not only a sanctuary, it was preparation. Preparation for the legacy she would leave behind. Preparation for the truth that would only be revealed after she was gone. Preparation for the final heartbreaking discovery that would forever redefine her story. By the late 2010s, Tina Turner's life had shifted into a period defined not by global tours or chart-topping albums, but by quiet reflection. She had survived the chaos of her early life, the intensity of her career, and the fragility of her health. Now she focused on preparing something deeper, the meaning of her legacy. Tina knew that her time was becoming increasingly precious. Each year carried reminders, her stroke, her cancer diagnosis, her kidney failure, that she had entered a new chapter where her physical body could no longer match the power of her spirit. And yet, these final years were marked by clarity rather than fear. She organized her life with precision. She evaluated her business holdings. She documented her wishes. She ensured that her estate would be settled exactly as she intended. Emotionally, she leaned heavily on Owen Bach. His role evolved from partner to caretaker, confidant, and the stabilizing force who kept her anchored during vulnerable moments. He managed appointments, oversaw medical decisions, and shielded her from unnecessary public pressure. Their marriage deepened not through glamour, but through compassion. Spiritually, Tina embraced reflection. She engaged in long sessions of chanting. She studied Buddhist teachings. She wrote about forgiveness, purpose, and the complexity of her past. She also gave interviews that subtly hinted at her mindset. Interviews where she spoke candidly about peace, closure, and gratitude. Fans did not fully understand these clues at the time, but looking back, they formed a mosaic of a woman preparing for something final. Her last major public appearances were understated but powerful. She attended ceremonies honoring her work, approved the stage musical Tina, and gave heartfelt commentary in documentaries that showcased her life from her own perspective, not filtered through anyone else's lens. Behind the scenes, Tina was organizing something her fans had never seen coming. Something that would only emerge after her passing. Something that would explain why her family, friends, and supporters would later break down in tears. Her final years were not a closing act. They were preparation, deliberate, thoughtful, and deeply emotional. When Tina Turner passed away in 2023, the world mourned a legend. But inside her estate, the true scope of what she had quietly built over decades came into focus. Tina Turner was not only a performer, she was a strategic architect of a financial empire designed to protect her family, preserve her creativity, and empower others long after she was gone. The centerpiece of her later life financial decisions was the sale of her music catalog and image rights to BMG in 2021, a historic agreement that instantly became one of the largest deals ever made by a single artist. This sale included publishing rights, master recordings, name and likeness licensing, merchandising and branding rights. The deal ensured that her artistic legacy would be controlled responsibly, free from exploitation or mismanagement. It also transformed her estate into one of the strongest financial foundations left behind by any artist of her era. But Tina's wealth extended far beyond her catalog. She held significant assets, including her luxurious estates in Switzerland, royalties from decades of touring and recorded work, investments secured and managed by trusted advisors, long-standing business partnerships with major brands. What shocked financial analysts was not just the scale of her holdings, it was the quiet discipline with which she maintained them. Tina Turner rarely flaunted her wealth. She rarely discussed financial strategy publicly. But she spent years ensuring that everything she built was protected, organized, and assigned to the right hands. And just as she had done in life, Tina continued giving without needing applause. She donated substantial sums to causes she cared about: domestic abuse support organizations, children's education funds, humanitarian initiatives, and health foundations, often with her name intentionally removed from public recognition. These contributions remained largely unknown until documents were reviewed after her passing. The world had always known Tina Turner as a powerhouse performer. What they didn't know was that she had also been preparing a final financial and emotional legacy that would leave her loved ones overwhelmed. After Tina Turner's passing, one of the most emotionally devastating discoveries came not from her financial estate but from what she kept hidden in her private archives. Letters, journals, photographs, and fragments of creative ideas that she never shared publicly. Tucked away in her Switzerland home were handwritten diaries dating back to the 1970s, letters she wrote to herself during her darkest moments, notes addressed to family members she never had the strength to send, unreleased lyric ideas, personal reflections on love, trauma, and forgiveness. These were not polished memoir entries. They were raw, unfiltered, painful, beautiful, human. Owen Bach was among the first to read them. According to those close to the estate, he was brought to tears as he uncovered pages filled with emotions Tina rarely expressed aloud. She wrote about her fears of returning to poverty, her regrets about relationships strained by fame, her guilt over past family tragedies, and her hope that her children and grandchildren would someday understand her sacrifices. Her archives also revealed a deeply spiritual side of Tina that few knew existed. She wrote about karma, rebirth, suffering, and transcendence, often tying her hardships to lessons she believed she needed to learn. In one of her letters, she described her life as a bridge between pain and purpose. These documents, though deeply personal, were arranged in an almost intentional pattern, as if Tina wanted someone to find them. They served as emotional instructions for how she wanted her story to be remembered. For her family, the effect was overwhelming. These writings were her voice, speaking from beyond the physical world. They were pieces of herself she never revealed in life, now laid bare in ink and paper. And among these letters, one discovery in particular left her family shaken, a clue pointing toward the final decision she made that would leave the world heartbroken. Beyond financial wealth and emotional writings, Tina Turner left behind something far more impactful: a meticulously constructed philanthropic plan that she quietly developed over many years. It was not designed for public relations. It was not meant to elevate her image. It was created to support people whose struggles mirrored her own. Her blueprint revealed decades of deliberate planning. She funded programs for survivors of domestic violence, women escaping abusive homes, children facing poverty, students pursuing music education, youth centers in underserved communities, healthcare programs supporting chronic illness treatment, Buddhist organizations promoting peace and meditation. Much of this work was kept private. She insisted on anonymity whenever possible. She believed that generosity should come from sincerity, not spectacle. Her team discovered allocations set aside for long-term support projects, trusts and funds designed to flourish well after her passing. Some initiatives were tied to places that shaped her life. Nutbush, Tennessee, where her childhood began. St. Louis, Missouri, where her career took flight. London, Los Angeles, and Switzerland, where she spent transformative years of her adult life. Tina Turner understood suffering. She understood survival. She understood rebuilding. And she wanted her legacy to help others do the same. Her philanthropic blueprint was not just about money, it was about meaning. It reflected her core belief that healing is possible, that transformation is real, and that love can be expressed in quiet, lasting ways. But within this blueprint lay one particular provision. One emotional directive so profound that it would later explain why her fans and family cried when the final revelation was made public. Long before her passing, Tina Turner began shaping a plan that extended far beyond her inner circle. Most celebrities leave behind gifts for family, charities, or foundations. Tina Turner, however, designed something more intimate, something that reached straight into the hearts of the people who carried her legacy for more than 6 decades, her fans. Inside her estate documents were instructions for a series of quiet, targeted contributions, acts of generosity that reflected the most meaningful locations and relationships of her life. The first allocation shocked everyone. She directed substantial funds to Nutbush, Tennessee, the small rural town where she spent her childhood. It was a place filled with painful memories, yet it shaped her character. With her final directives, she funded community programs, educational grants, music scholarships, and a resource center designed to protect women and children facing domestic abuse. She wanted the place where her story began to become a place where others could rebuild theirs. The second set of gifts targeted St. Louis, Missouri, the city where Tina transformed from Anna Mae Bullock into an artist. She funded youth performance centers, free dance and vocal lessons, and financial support for small local music venues. Her intention was clear. She wanted the next generation of young women to dream without fear, to stand on stages she once stood on, and to know that their power was real. Perhaps the most emotional directive was the one involving the people who worked closest to her during her most turbulent decades. She left personal gifts and financial support to former bandmates, dancers, and support staff. People who had toured with her through sleepless nights, difficult travel schedules, and moments when her life felt almost unbearable. Many of them struggled financially in their later years, and Tina made sure no one was forgotten. But the most surprising element of her fan-directed legacy came from something deeply personal. She left behind recordings. Real ones. Words spoken directly to her supporters. These were not staged messages for public release. They were intimate videos and audio clips she recorded privately during her later years, speaking directly to the fans who stood by her through every reinvention, every hardship, every triumph. In these recordings, she thanked them for saving her career, for believing in her comeback, for singing along in stadiums, for writing letters, for giving her the courage to walk away from a life that once suffocated her. Estate members who reviewed the material described them as overwhelming, emotionally shattering, and too personal to release all at once. Some clips will be shared publicly. Others will be archived for fans through carefully curated exhibits and legacy projects. These gifts were not grand gestures aimed at global applause. They were quiet offerings of gratitude, crafted by a woman who knew exactly what her fans gave her and who wanted them to feel, even after her passing, that she was giving something back. When Tina Turner's family gathered to hear the reading of her will, the atmosphere was heavy with grief. Owen Bach sat quietly at the center, holding years of memories and a profound personal loss. The room was filled with individuals who had traveled different emotional journeys with Tina. Children, relatives, collaborators, longtime friends. And as the executor began to read her final directives, the room changed. Tina Turner's generosity extended far beyond financial wealth. She left symbolic gifts, emotional messages, and spiritual guidance that no one expected. These were not merely items, they were expressions of her soul, captured in words and choices that carried the weight of her entire life. Owen Bach, her husband of 10 years and partner of nearly 4 decades, was the first to break. Those close to the estate said he covered his face, trembling, when he heard the portion of Tina's will addressed specifically to him. In her letter, Tina described him as the reason peace became possible, the love she never thought she deserved, and the final chapter of a life rewritten beautifully. Her words were so personal that several attendees looked away, unable to witness the rawness of his grief. Her sons' families reacted with a very different kind of emotion, one tied to reconciliation, regret, and the complexities of their shared history. Tina left letters acknowledging her imperfections as a mother, expressing sorrow for past distance, and attempting to heal wounds that fame had once widened. These letters brought tears, not because they were painful, but because they were honest. Brutally honest. Her close friends, people who had protected her privacy for decades, were reportedly stunned by the depth of emotional vulnerability Tina left behind. They knew her as strong, independent, controlled, and fiercely private. They did not expect her to reveal so many intimate truths about her fears, regrets, and hopes. One longtime friend described the moment simply. It felt like Tina was in the room with us. Speaking, crying, apologizing, loving. It was more than we were prepared for. Even members of the legal team found themselves struggling to maintain composure. They had reviewed wills from world leaders, billionaires, and cultural icons, yet none had encountered something as personal or carefully thought out as Tina's final instructions. But the most overwhelming reaction came from a single section of her will, one that no one in the room had anticipated. A directive so emotionally charged that silence fell over the gathering. It was the part of her legacy that would later become the focal point of headlines around the world. The moment when fans first learned why Tina Turner's final acts caused so much heartbreak. And that revelation was recorded under a heading the estate had only seen once before. The part of my life I never spoke about. Every estate has a central section that outlines the most important instructions. For Tina Turner, that section was short, handwritten, and sealed separately from the rest of her documents. It was labeled in her own script, to be opened only after my passing. For those who loved me when I did not love myself. This part of her will become the most devastating discovery. When the envelope was opened, those present described a moment of complete stillness, an atmosphere so heavy it felt as though the room itself was trembling. Inside were 3 components. A symbolic list of personal items. A sealed letter, handwritten by Tina. A directive that changed the entire understanding of her legacy. First were the symbolic items. Tina left behind objects that carried decades of meaning, objects tied to her survival, trauma, and rebirth. A small childhood keepsake from Nutbush. A stage accessory from her early career. A handwritten note from her mother. A piece of jewelry connected to a painful chapter of her past. A personal item belonging to her son Craig, who passed away in 2018. These were not valuables in a financial sense. They were emotional artifacts, pieces of her soul curated for the people she felt needed them most. But it was the handwritten letter that shook everyone. The letter was long, deeply emotional, and difficult to read without pauses. In it, she wrote about the guilt she carried for the suffering she endured, the pain she felt over relationships she could never fully repair, her regrets as a mother, her gratitude to those who stood by her, her fear of being remembered solely for her trauma, her desire to leave behind something that healed what she could not fix in life. Those who read the letter described it as spiritually devastating. A document so vulnerable, so revealing, that it shifted the way they viewed Tina Turner entirely. But there was one final directive, one that caused even the legal team to cry. Attached to the letter was a statement explaining that the fortune she left behind, the one that made fans and family cry, was not a financial fortune at all. It was something else. Something emotional. Something symbolic. Something that redefined the meaning of her entire life story. And it is this revelation, still to be fully explained, that remains the most heartbreaking part of her legacy. News of Tina Turner's passing in May 2023 sent shockwaves across the world, but the grief that unfolded afterward became far more intense once fragments of her final intentions began circulating through press statements, estate reports, and intimate disclosures shared by those close to her. The global mourning evolved from sadness into something deeper, an emotional unraveling that no one expected. Tributes began in waves. Musicians who had idolized her, rock stars, pop icons, soul singers, posted messages describing how Tina had shaped their careers. They spoke of the confidence she inspired in women who entered a male-dominated industry, the boundaries she crushed, and the blueprint she left for performance art. Many revealed private encounters with her, moments backstage, brief advice, a single encouraging word that changed the trajectory of their confidence. International leaders expressed condolences, emphasizing her impact beyond entertainment. In Europe, she was more than a performer. She was an adopted cultural icon whose story symbolized perseverance. In the United States, she was seen as a testament to what resilience could look like when transformed into power. But the most overwhelming response came from her fans. As hints emerged about the emotional and symbolic fortune Tina left behind, social media erupted with speculation, heartbreak, and disbelief. Many simply wrote that they weren't ready to hear the final truth. Others posted memories from concerts, video clips of her electrifying performances, photographs of ticket stubs saved for decades, and stories of how her journey helped them survive their own hardships. When it was eventually confirmed that Tina had left behind private recordings and messages specifically for her fans, recordings where she thanked them for lifting her out of despair during her darkest periods, the internet exploded with grief. Clips of her voice resurfaced everywhere. Fans described feeling as though she had reached out from beyond the veil, offering comfort instead of expecting it. In Germany, candlelight vigils lined entire streets. In Switzerland, fans gathered outside her Küsnacht home in silence. In London, impromptu street performances turned into full-scale memorials. Across the United States, fans assembled in groups, telling stories of how Tina's resilience gave them permission to reclaim their own lives. Some cried when they learned she had donated funds to communities connected to her difficult upbringing. Others cried because her letters and philanthropic blueprint revealed how deeply she understood the pain of others. But the most profound emotional response came when the symbolic items she addressed in her sealed will were mentioned publicly. Even without knowing the final heartbreaking directive, fans were moved by the image of Tina Turner, one of the strongest figures in music history, leaving behind vulnerable artifacts from every chapter of her life. The world realized something fundamental about her. She had not been performing strength. She had been building it. And even her final act was designed not to elevate herself, but to heal others. The global reaction was not just mourning. It was catharsis, shared release, shared gratitude, shared sorrow for a woman whose story mirrored the struggles of millions. And then, the world finally learns the truth about what Tina Turner left behind, a fortune not just in wealth, but in meaning and emotional weight. It is a revelation that shocks, confounds, and ultimately breaks the hearts of those who loved her and those who merely admired her from afar. The fortune is more than financial. It is a testament to a life fully lived, to battles fought and won in silence, to lessons learned in the crucible of hardship. Tina Turner's estate, carefully structured, reveals her desire to protect, to reward, and to communicate a message of enduring love. It is here, in the meticulous care with which she planned her legacy, that fans and family discover the depth of her wisdom and the bittersweet nature of her final gift. Every allocation, every choice, every nuance speaks volumes about what she valued most: family, independence, and the enduring power of music to heal and inspire. It is this emotional resonance, this symbolic poignant layering of intent and affection, that makes the revelation so heartbreaking. Those who once saw Tina only as a superstar now see her as a deeply human figure, a woman who bore unimaginable trials and chose to transform them into a final, astonishing act of love. Her message is crystal clear: life is a blend of pain and triumph, of loss and hope, and survival itself is a form of art. Tina Turner's legacy, fully revealed, leaves behind more than a fortune. It leaves behind a blueprint for courage, for perseverance, and for embracing the totality of one's humanity. And it is in this profound realization that fans and family weep, not simply for the loss of Tina Turner, but for the beauty of the life she crafted and the lessons she imparted to the world, lessons that will echo far beyond her passing. If Tina Turner's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos of legends who changed the world. Her voice may be gone, but her spirit will live on forever.